Hello, Fearless Gamers! Matt here for Fearless Games, and today we're going to continue on with our How to Play Battlefleet Gothic. Now, we've had a little bit of time since the last video I posted to this one, so hopefully you've had a chance to at least play a couple of games of Battlefleet Gothic using the basic rules, and are comfortable now to continue onto the advanced rules. Now, thankfully the advanced rules, just add a few things to the basic rules, so you're not really having to learn anything extremely new, just enough, to add a little bit of flavor to the game and introduce you to a couple of new moves and actions you can perform in each turn. And so we're going to break this up into two, and we're going to break this probably up into just two videos, because technically they count like they count one part as an advanced rule, but I like to keep it towards the planetary stuff. So we're going to break it up into advanced rules for space, and then the terrain pieces, which will involve the planetary defenses. So, first thing we're going to go over is squadrons. Squadrons is a new fleet registry type of thing, or fleet setup. As it sounds, squadrons are, groups of fighters together, and they can be built in different fashions. They can be escorts, cruisers, and heavy cruisers, grand cruisers, and battleship squadrons. There is a slight difference between escort squadrons and the other squadrons, and that is escort squadrons are built when you're making your army list. So, they're basically you basically build your squadron, you buy your squadrons in your fleet, whereas cruisers, grand cruisers, battleships, all that, they get to be squadroned at the beginning of the game before deployment. So, squadrons are basically they're already formed before the game starts. They're formed when you start your army list. Cruisers and battleship squadrons are basically an afterthought, like, oh, I'll squadron these guys together now that I know that I'm fighting up against that kind of army type of thing. And there are a couple of benefits to squadroning your ships. Now, one thing to note before we continue is, since escorts are formed at the beginning, they only have one leadership among them all. So, if you have like a squadron with 4 escorts, which I think is the minimum for squadrons, let's see. Yep, unless described otherwise, escort squadrons can contain up to 6 ships. So say if you got 6 escorts, you don't roll 6 leaderships for each escort in the squadron, you just roll 1, and that's the leadership for all of them. Grand cruisers and cruisers and all that, they all have their own leadership value beforehand, since they're made after fleet list is made. But the benefit is you only have to roll 1 leadership check for the entire squadron. In the case of like ships that have different leadership values, you take the highest, and they're considered, to be, the leader of the squadron. So you only have to roll 1 leadership for orders for every ship in the squadron. So, if you have 2 cruisers and you want both of them to go all ahead full, you roll 1 command check and the whole squadron gets all ahead full. You don't have to roll it twice. Same with a squadron of escorts. You want to come to a new heading, you only have to roll it once, not 6 times for each ship in the squadron. Now, there is a couple of downsides to squadrons as well, and we're going to get into this as we move along. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is squad formation. Ships in a squadron have to be within 15 centimeters of each other. So, unit coherency of like for 40k. Every ship has to, each ship has to be within 15 centimeters of another to be part of the squadron. If they're like a cruiser, grand cruiser, battleship, all like that, and they're outside of the squadron, they run on their own until, they go back into formation. Ships that are escorts, basically, no wait, scratch that, forgive me. With ships with the multiple, like battleship, grand cruisers, if one gets destroyed, then you have to go to the lower, you have to go to the next highest leadership and all that, and most of the ships can then, usually in the house rules here, we say that they can function on their own until they get back in. So if the squadron of cruisers goes all ahead full, he just has to roll out on his own separate leadership and doesn't get the benefit of the 1 leadership roll until he goes back into formation. Whereas escorts, if they break out of formation, they can't do anything but move back into formation. That's all they can do. They can't do anything else, and they don't benefit from any leadership, any order checks done until they're back in formation. That's what I really mean is, to do check orders and such. So, now, when it comes to maneuvering ships, they can maneuver in any different direction that they want, as long as they stay. The only, condition is you gotta try and keep them in coherency with each other so you can maintain the benefits of being in a squadron. Now, when you're shooting, the other thing is also squadrons don't have to be of light cruisers. You can mix and match ships in a squadron. So you're not forced, if you just pick, a Nightshade destroyer for Eldar, you're not forced to have the whole squadron be Nightshade destroyers. It could be a mixture of all the different escorts that Eldar have to offer. Now, when it comes to shooting at a squadron, this is how it's done. You basically have this issue where you have different variant degrees of targets with a squadron. Like, for example, some ships of the squadron may be closing, while other ships are beam. In this case, when it comes to weapon battery attacks, because with lances it's pretty much, the general gist, it doesn't really affect them that much, but for, weapon batteries, that's become the big issue. Like, say, if, they are, one's closing, one's a beam, and all that. What you would do, then, is the attacker must select the category of targets, and can only affect the ships in that category. So, let's say, for this example here, this Chaos Cruiser wants to shoot at this squadron of escorts. 2 of them are closing, while 2 are a beam. Because the closing has a better chance of hitting and gets more dice rolls, the cruiser decides to fire at the closing category. So any hits that he gets can only apply to the 2 ships that are closing. So if he gets 3 hits, the other 2 can't get fired at because he didn't fire at the closing ships. Now, when firing at a unit and allocating hits to them, any hits scored are allocated to the nearest eligible ship in the squadron until it's destroyed. Then the next nearest eligible ship takes the remaining damage. So it's basically one ship, you have 7 shots. You have to allocate all 7 to, you basically have to allocate enough shots to the first closest ship to blow it up, then the next ship goes and blows it up, then the next ship, and so on and so forth. A leadership test cannot be taken to pick out individual ships, so you can't pick out, say if there's one that's got the lances, you can't pick out the one with the lances. You're forced, the damage goes to the closest ship to you no matter what. Now, what happens if you have different armor values with a squadron? The way this works then is you find the lowest armor value in the squadron, and you roll all your dice. You then take the die that would affect the lower armor, like matching it. So let's say here in this example here, we've got a Chaos Cruiser and 3 escorts. One of the escorts has an armor... Now, this is just, exampling, so if anyone starts quoting me, oh, those armor values are wrong, this is just, for examples. We have one ship here that's got a 4, has an armor value of 4, one ship that has an armor value of 5, one ship that has an armor value of 6. And the Chaos Cruiser rolls his 3 weapon battery dies at them, and he rolls a 4, a 5, and a 6. Now, normally what now, you can't swap the 6 to the 4, so the 4 gets blown up, but the 6 is fine. The way it actually works is you then take those dies that affects each armor value. So the 4 would be allocated to the ship with an armor value of 4, the 5 would be allocated to the ship with an armor value of 5, and the ship that's an armor value of 6 would be allocated the dice roll of 6. So, when it comes to firing at ships with multiple armors, it's kind of tweaked, so it's kind of tweaked in a way where it's pseudo-fair. By that I mean the defending player doesn't get to go, oh, the lowest armor value is 4, so that 6 affects that 4, but that 4 can't affect that 5. Oh, I'm sorry, you only got 1 wound. It's basically to prevent that, so the defender is forced to take the 4 and put it on the armor value 4, so the 5 or the 6 that you roll can affect the ship with the armor value 5 or 6. So basically it plays it where the maximum amount of room, it doesn't punish the attacker for rolling a lot of attacks, but shooting at a squadron with multiple armor in it. Now, what if a ship is out? What if the ship in a squadron is out of a firing arc of your attacking vessel? Well, if it's the closest priority target. Well, that ship can be then ignored for target priority series for the sheer fact that it's out of a firing arc to where you can fire weapons. And in essence, you can only fire weapons at escorts in your firing arc. So, like a good example is here in this one, if we look at this vessel, this Chaos vessel here, it's got 3 escort ships. 2 are on its side, while one is in its front arc. So the 2 ships in the side arc are the only ones that can be affected by side arc weaponry, and the ship in the front can only be affected by front firing weapons only. This way, you're basically not going like, oh, I hit 5, oh, I fired 5, oh, I killed those 2, oh, it slips into the 1. No, the weapons can't magically, bend into different firing arcs. And on that front, that's how they kind of balance out the whole, oh, you can't allocate the highest dice roll to the lowest armor and the lowest dice roll to the highest armor. This kind of balances out where, oh, you can only kill the number of ships that are in your firing arc. You can't get you can't fire at these ships in this firing arc and manage to blow up those ones that are not in the firing arc of that weapon. That's how they kind of even it out. And so now, that's basically how most of the stuff goes when it comes to attacking and moving with squadrons. We're going to now go on to what happens when squadrons attack. They basically do follow all the same normal rules that that all other ships follow, except the fact that squadrons can fire their weapons together at once. The way this is done is you basically tally up the number, like say for lances, you tally up the number of lance shots and fire it at the target. And you have to follow target priority and all those rules that apply to regular ships, not in squadrons. On the off chance that you have ships in a squadron that are not in the right firing arc to shoot at the closest target, or they have no weapons that can fire at the closest target, they then may elect to fire at different targets. So, in essence, they can all fire at the same target. They can, fire at different targets, but, but again, they have to follow target priority. But in the case where they cannot follow target priority, they then have to just at least shoot at the closest target to them if they can't shoot the one that's closest to the rest of the squadron. Now, when it comes to weapon battery charts, that's when it gets a little weird, because it can show a different variety of problems. The first being, what if a squadron is positioned in such a way where it's in a different angle to shoot at a vessel? Now, this is how that works. In a perfect world, when the whole squadron is on one arc of the ship, you combo all the weapon batteries together and roll on the chart as normal. But in this situation that we've got here, this escort squadron wants to fire at this Chaos cruiser. 3 of them are in the side arc of the Chaos cruiser, while 2 of them are in the rear arc of the ship. So in technicality, the ship is presented at a beam and moving away. And the way that you resolve this is you take the 3 ships that are on the abeam side, combo their weapon batteries together, and fire at the ship using the abeam chart. Now, those last 2 ships that are in the rear arc would then combo their weapon batteries together and then fire at the ship as if it was using the moving away category. And that's how you really solve that issue. Now, when it comes to launching ordnance, this is done in a way where it's basically it is done a little weird, but it does kind of make things a little bit easier. squadrons can fire their ordnance, or they can, by themselves, or they can combo them all together. They can only combo their ordnance together if they're touching bases with each other. So, in this example here, these 3 escorts want to fire their torpedoes. They each have 1 torpedo. Since they're not touching each other's bases, they can only fire 1 servo each, making it, 3 missiles by themselves. Now, if we take those ships and make them where their bases are touching, they may then make 1 3-strength wave of torpedoes instead of 3 1-strength torpedo waves. Now, when it comes to launching them forward, you always measure from the furthest ship back. This way, your ordnance doesn't gain an extra couple of centimeters from being fired at the front with that dude in the back. So if you have them lined up where they're each, behind each other, then it's the one in the back that fires it, not the one in the front or the middle, just to make it fair so they don't get that extra few centimeters from the sheer fact that the ship in front of it is closer to its target. Now, that is all there is to talk about with squadrons. So, now that we've talked about squadrons, let's talk about the advanced movement rules. There's two new things added to the movement phase for this. First is ramming. Ramming is done when, after you've made a successful all-ahead full check, you manage to cross the paths with another enemy vessel, and you roll a successful leadership to do so. So the way it's done is you take a ship that's already passed its leadership check for all-ahead full. You then move in to see if you make contact, base-to-base contact, with the ship you wish to ram. You then roll another leadership check, and if you pass, you manage to get your ship in line to hit the side of the vessel. If you fail, you dodge that, you accidentally, miscalculate, and you go under it, over it, the whole 9 yards. So what happens if you actually hit the vessel? Well, a ramming ship does it does a number of d6 equal to its starting damage points. So, if your ship has 6 hit points when it started the game, you get to roll 6d6 against that vessel that you hit. Now, and the armor value is the value of whatever that facing is if it has multiple armor facings. And aside from holofields and all those other special saves, this ignores shields. But there is a downside to ramming, and that is the fact that you can get hurt yourself. When you ram a ship, you will suffer half the number of starting hit points that ship had in d6s in damage. So, in this example here, we've got a Chaos Cruiser and an Imperial Cruiser. The Imperial Cruiser manages to get its all-ahead full check order down and moves forward, and it manages to hit the Chaos Cruiser. You roll another leadership check, and it passes. It now the Chaos Cruiser had 6 starting hit points, and the Imperial Cruiser had 6 starting hit points. The Imperial player then rolls 6d6 and has to meet or beat the Chaos Cruiser's armor. On the flip side, the Chaos Cruiser's player then gets to roll 3d6, half the starting number of armor points it had, and rolls that and does any damage to any die roll that meets or beats the Imperial ship's armor value suffers damage to that vessel. Now, what if the two ships hit each other head on? So we switch this scenario around, and the Chaos Cruiser is going to get hit in the front of so basically getting hit in the nose with the nose of the Imperial ship. In this case, the Chaos Cruiser gets to roll its full number of hit points in d6 against the Imperial Cruiser. So, if the Imperial Cruiser hits it in, nose to nose, then the Imperial Cruiser suffers 6d6 rolls to itself instead of 3, like it would if it had hit it on the side. Another thing to keep a note is you can only ram 1 ship per movement. And that's it. And once the ram is done, you continue moving forward as normal. The other thing that you can do in the movement phase is disengage. Now, what this is basically this is a representation of a ship going, you know, like, we cannot do this, we gotta get out of here. And in some missions, and in some cases, if you're doing like a mission-based thing or a victory points thing, you want those ships to get away. So, you can do what's called a disengage. The disengage can happen when you're on the table, or you can automatically disengage by moving off the table completely. If you move off the table completely, you're counted as disengaged. And any vessel that disengages from the game cannot come back. Now, what happened? Now, just a note here with squadrons: if one of the ships of the squadron goes off the table, the entire squadron is removed. It's basically an all or none scenario when it comes to squadrons. Now, say if you're not able to move off the field and you want to disengage, what you would then do is you would make a leadership check at the end of the movement phase with the following modifiers applied. Each blast marker within 5 centimeters, you add a +1 to your leadership. Any celestial phenomenon within 15 centimeters, you get a +3 to your leadership. Just a note, this is these are for table features like asteroid fields or planets. If a table effect such as a radiation burst or solar flares taking place, this bonus applies to that as well. Or for each enemy ship or ordnance marker within 15 centimeters, you reduce your leadership by 1. You roll this check, and if you pass, the ship disengages and is off. Now, if the test is passed, the ship is disengaged and is removed from the table and may not return the game. If the test is failed, the ship remains in play, but may not fire, launch ordnance, or attempt to use special orders except for brace for impact during this turn. Any ship or squadron that through a combination of efforts is reduced to a leadership of 1 or less must attempt to disengage or move towards the closest table edge. So if you through a lot of blast marker damage or anything like that, you have to, and you're reduced down to a leadership of 1, you have to disengage. The ship is just like, game over, man, and they are out of there. And like noted, if a ship or part of a squadron or a whole squadron moves off the table edge, they disengage automatically whether they wanted to or not. So now let's move on to the final addition to the advanced rules done in the end phase. First one we're going to do is the hit and run attacks, mainly because this does affect units that were introduced in the ordnance phase on the basic rules, your boarding torpedoes and your assault boats. Hit and run attacks are when you send like a small vessel or a torpedo and breach the hull of a ship, send a small little squadron of dudes in, do a little bit of damage, and then run out. And so that's what the assault boats and the boarding torpedoes do. You can also perform a teleport attack for a hit and run. There's only a couple of restrictions with this. That is, the ship that you wish to do it to has to have no shields, and it can only be cruisers and above. You can't do it with escorts. And that one, that's basically just, teleporting guys in and then teleporting them back out. And the way you resolve a hit and run attack is you simply roll a d6. On a score of a 1, the attack failed. On a 2 or more, you look up the score on the critical hits chart and apply the result immediately. This critical damage can be repaired as normal. Remember that an escort which suffers a critical damage is automatically destroyed, though they can brace for impact to counter this effect. So, you go assault boats hit, boarding torpedoes hit, roll a d6, roll of a 2 or higher, you look at the critical chart table, and that's the critical effect that happened. Teleport attacks, you get, let's see, with them, you have to be, let's see, activate the shields, so which attacks, the only ship's largest can you... So, if you get a ship to an enemy vessel, you have to be within 10 centimeters to do this. The target ship has to have no shields. You can then do a teleport attack as if they were hit by assault boats or boarding torpedoes. So again, they can only be done by larger like cruisers, grand cruisers, battleships, and that lot, and they have to be within 10 centimeters of the ship, and it has to have no shields. And the last thing that was added to the end phase was boarding actions. Boarding actions are fun, especially when you're playing against the Tau, because they are terrible at it. You can actually, there's actually a chance to destroy a cruiser with an escort. It's really that bad. The way boarding actions are is essentially, it's a little bit more advanced than a hit and run attack. You line up against them, you shoot boarding tubes, and you run across with a bunch of guys and try and take out the ship from the inside. You can only perform this action if you are touching bases with a ship and you didn't perform any other action. You can't be under, let's see. You must declare it in the movement phase when contact is made. Vessels attempting a boarding action may not fire weapons or launch ordnance in the same turn as they are too busy performing the boarding action. Then you determine what is your boarding value. This is determined by the number of damage points remaining. There are then a bunch of extra factors that come into play in this. You get a +1 modifier if the enemy ship has blast markers touching it, +2 if the enemy ship is crippled, +1 if the enemy ship is under special orders, +1 if you're Chaos or Orcs, +2 if you're Space Marines. If your base boarding value is higher than the other vessel, +1. If it's twice the enemies, +2. If it's 3 times, +3. If it's 4 times, +4. You don't get the benefit of all of them. You get the benefit of the highest. So if your base boarding value is 4 times greater, you don't get +1 for being higher, +2 for being double, +3 for being 3 times, +4 for being 4 times. It's just the +4. You take those modifiers and you add them to the remaining damage points you have left, and you roll a d6. You then add that total together, and if your result beats the opponent, then you win. And in essence, what happens is, the thing though is with this is the other person can win too. So it's basically whoever gets the highest value is the winner. So, in this example here, we've got an Imperial Cruiser and a Chaos Cruiser. Both ships are perfectly healthy, so each of them have 6 hit points. They come in base contact, and the Imperial Cruiser has announced that they're going to make a boarding action. Their base values is 6, starting off. And we're going to say that the Chaos Cruiser is under special orders. So the Imperial ship gets +1 for the ship being under special orders. But the Chaos vessel gets a +1 because it's a Chaos ship. So now they have a 7 and 7 boarding value. 6 + 1. So then they both roll a d6, add it to their boarding value, and the person with the higher score wins. Now, this is what happens at the result of a boarding action. The difference in which you win by is the amount of damage you apply to your opponent. So if you win by 3, that's 3 damage that you apply to that ship. And let's see. If the ship is reduced to 0 damage by boarding action, you do not you do not roll on the catastrophic table. Instead, the ship automatically becomes a drifting hulk. Let's see, exception if a ship is reduced to 0 damage by a critical hit, roll on the catastrophic table, which is we're going to get into now. So once you've applied your damage, you then determine how much the difference of the score is and roll on this little chart here, found on page 34. This determines, so let's just say for argument's sake, you win by 3. It was driven back. The winner scores a critical hit on a 3+, whereas the loser scores a critical hit on a 6+. Now, and as stated, if you know, once, let's see, exception if ship is reduced to 0 damage. So if it's hit, so if it does 0 damage, you don't roll, it automatically becomes a drifting Hulk. But if it's reduced to 0 damage because of the critical damage chart that you do, because you apply critical, then you roll on the catastrophic table. Now, what happens, and then what happens after this is the ship then moves off and continues on its way. What if it's a draw? At this point, neither ship may move. Let's see. In this case, the ships grapple together and continue fighting in each supplement end phase. Neither ship may move, shoot, or launch ordnance until the boarding action results in one of the ships being reduced to 0 hit points. So, on the off chance that it's a draw, they're stuck there for the rest of the game until one of them is destroyed. Now, it is possible to do multiple boarding actions at once on the same enemy vessel. What you would do is you'd get both your ships to come in base contact with the vessel, and then perform your boarding action. The way you would do this is you would tally both ships together for your boarding value, then apply your modifiers, and then roll your d6. So it gives you a pretty high chance of taking down the ship, or at least beating it in the combat. When it comes to damage, the damage is applied to each ship as per the attacker wishes. So the attacker gets to divvy up the damage to whichever ships they are. When it comes to a critical hit in this situation, both ships are at risk for suffering a critical damage no matter what. So the ship gets to roll, so the defending ship gets to roll and gets to roll for critical damage for both ships, not just one critical hit for one of them. Now, just a note, it is possible for escorts to do this. They can do boarding actions. Just got to keep in mind that a critical damage will kill them, even if they win. So they may win and not suffer any normal damage points, but they may suffer a critical hit and get destroyed that way. So it's not the best practice to use escorts to do boarding actions unless you're fighting Tau, because then you basically have because Tau have these horrible rules when it comes to boarding actions. And that is it for the advanced rules of how to play Battlefleet Gothic. Next time we tune in, I'm going to try and get this out a little bit sooner, probably in like a day or two. Maybe I'll give it a week. We will talk about the planetary defenses and the terrain pieces. So, that is all for right now. Until next time, fearless gamers, take care!